Our last chapter, finishing up the nervous system, is on senses. Senses are grouped into two categories, general and special. This is based on how widespread the receptors are. A general sense has receptors in multiple locations, maybe spread throughout, say, your entire skin. General senses also include information coming from joints and organs. Special senses have a specific organ that's the only place you detect that, and it's in the head. So, the 5 senses you learned as a kid, touch is a general sense. The other 4 are special: taste, smell, vision, and hearing. And there's a 5th special sense called equilibrium or balance. Every sense follows the same basic pathway where there's a stimulus, a receptor that detects it, and a sensory neuron that takes the message to the brain, where the brain interprets the message, makes sense out of it. The receptor sometimes is part of the neuron, and sometimes it's a separate cell associated with it, or a group of cells, or a structure of some kind. There's 5 categories of receptors by what kind of stimulus they can detect. Chemoreceptors detect some kind of chemical. These are used for taste and smell, and also for body chemistry, like what's the pH of your blood, how much sodium is in it, how much oxygen, things like that. Pain receptors are their own category. Sometimes you'll see them called nociceptors. Thermoreceptors, what does a thermometer or thermometer measure? Temperature, so that's what your thermoreceptors are for. You have separate sets for detecting warm temperatures and for detecting cold temperatures. Mechanoreceptors detect some kind of physical force. This is the most diverse category. We'll look at some types of them on the next slide. Photoreceptors detect light. Photography is light writing. What sense would these be used for? Vision. Some major types of mechanoreceptors include proprioceptors, which detect tension in tendons and muscles. Proprio means your own, so basically they're sensing yourself, your body position. And that's a major place the cerebellum gets its information. Baroreceptors detect blood pressure. Baro is pressure, so when the meteorologists talk about the barometric pressure, they're being repetitive. They're saying the pressure measuring pressure. Stretch receptors detect lung inflation. And then most of touch is mechanoreceptors of multiple types. Hearing and balance also use mechanoreceptors. For balance or equilibrium, there are structures that can detect movement of the body or which way gravity is pulling. Hearing, does anyone know what sound waves are? There's 2 ways of describing it. It's either vibrating air or other substances vibrating, or it's changes in pressure in a wave. It's kind of the same thing, but different ways of looking at it. So hearing is a physical force, so it uses mechanoreceptors. Now, questions on receptor categories? Sensation is the term for the information collected by the receptors. So this is what kind of information is it. That'll be based on which receptors it's hitting, and its intensity. So things like the brightness and color of light, the frequency of sound is high-pitched, low-pitched, and other basic information like, you know, is something pressing on my hand and where exactly. And then when the brain interprets the input, that is your perception of it. Optical illusions are often based on the differences in perception. Perception fills in missing information and provides meaning to what you're seeing. For a couple of examples, how many people see a white square here? Yeah, almost everybody. The square isn't actually drawn. It's suggested by where the black stops. We interpret that as a square because we're filling in the missing information. We're making an outline out of this. What's this? Cube? Not really, it's a flat picture. But we recognize that as indicating a 3D object in a flat picture. And that's perception. Another thing that happens with senses in general is adaptation. Adaptation is ignoring a constant stimulus, something like the feel of your clothes. You'll notice the stimulus again if it changes, if it goes away and then comes back, or sometimes if you start thinking about it, because how many people noticed their clothes after I mentioned it as a thing you stopped noticing? This is a big one with smell, where, you know, say you get home and you go, oh, I need to change the litter box, but first I got to do this and this and this. And then maybe you go take out some trash, or you go out to get the mail, and you come back and go, oh yeah, the litter box, because you adapted to it and stopped noticing it. There are some air freshener manufacturers that are trying to adjust to this they make one that changes between two scents. So when you get used to one, it switches and you notice the other one. Adaptation can come from the receptors or pathways in the central nervous system. Peripheral adaptation, so coming from the peripheral nervous system, is the receptors stop responding. Central adaptation is the receptors are still going, hey, this is happening, but the brain is blocking it out. This one happens with pain, where your pain receptors don't stop saying, hey, my toe is hurt, but your brain releases neurotransmitters called endorphins that put in an inhibitory stimulus, where the message from the receptor is an excitatory stimulus to try to cancel it out or at least damp it down a bit, so that, okay, I'm aware that I've hurt this part of my body and I need to deal with it, but I don't need it constantly taking up my attention. Questions on adaptation? So let's have a look at our general senses. On the body surface, we pick up touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. There's 3 major types of receptors in the skin, which we'll look at on the next slide. In our organs, we can detect body chemistry, the activity of those organs, like is my stomach churning, how much are my lungs stretched, pressure and stretch of organs, this, another one. And then in our joints, we have proprioception. So detecting how bent is it, how much strain am I putting on the muscle and tendon. So here's a little slice of epidermis. The first skin receptor type is the free nerve endings. What that means is there's nothing encasing the dendrites to either protect them or moderate the stimulus. They just branch out between cells of the epidermis. Free nerve endings are used for a couple of different purposes. Each neuron will only detect one of these, but you'll have several in a particular area so that you can detect all four. Some of them are for itch, as a kind of mechanical force. Pain receptors are free nerve endings, and then thermoreceptors are also free nerve endings. Within the thermoreceptors, there are some that detect warm and some that detect cold. They each have a specific temperature range that they can pick up. Warm is a little over room temperature up to pretty hot. The cold receptors are just below room temperature down to about 50. If you go outside this range, colder than that or hotter than that, instead of stimulating the thermoreceptors, you stimulate the pain receptors because it's such a strong temperature change that it can cause damage. That's where you get the idea of something is so cold it burns, where you can't tell that it's cold, you can just tell that it hurts. Questions on free nerve endings? Second type is tactile corpuscles. These used to be called Meissner's corpuscles. They are in the dermal papillae. There's a dendrite coiled up in an oval. Do you know what tactile means? Sensation, usually touch. Okay. So these are your basic light touch receptors, only they're not everywhere. They're most concentrated in the really sensitive areas like fingertips and the face. So if you are, say, just brushing your hand against the desk, you're stimulating the tactile corpuscles. Then lamellated corpuscles, which used to be called Pacinian corpuscles, are deeper in the dermis. And around the dendrite there are layers. Where did we see lamellae before? Anyone remember? I think I'm hearing it. In the bone? Yeah, it was the layers of solid matrix. Okay, so lamellae means layers. So this lamellated corpuscle means the layered body. These detect pressure and vibration. The way they work is if you push on a part of your skin, it squeezes those layers and that stimulates the neuron. Vibration makes it shake back and forth and it kind of squeezes on one side and the other, alternating. So that's why they pick up vibration also. These are illustrations of just looking at one close-up. There are several other receptor types in the skin, but these are the most important ones to remember. So, any questions on these? bit more about pain. There are pain receptors everywhere in the body except the nervous tissue of the brain. So when you say your brain hurts, and you don't mean it metaphorically, it's actually the meninges that are detecting that pain. What stimulates them is damage to tissues. Something that can happen with internal organs is referred pain. This is when, instead of feeling the pain where it actually is, it feels like it's somewhere on the surface. So some classic examples are pain from the heart being referred to the left arm and the left side of the chest. The stomach, it's here, but often the pain is referred up and more centered, and that's why we call it heartburn. Pain in the uterus can be referred to the lower back. So it's possible for someone not to realize she's in labor, but to think she's having backaches. And often menstrual cramps can come off as backaches too.